This screencast will briefly cover the 6 guidelines for conflict management and a handy little tool to remember this by. So the first one is that teacher calms down all parties before starting. So first the teacher needs to make sure they're calm, and then when engaging the children, empathically acknowledge their feelings, encourage deep breaths, and gentle touches. So as a teacher, I touch both children gently, provided that they want to be touched. Some children, when they're upset, do not. Usually the easiest way to do it is arms around both of them. And then I encourage the children to take deep breaths, and sometimes I even do it by modeling. Or I may say, seems like a good time to take some deep breaths so we can all be calm. Let's take some deep breaths together. Let's try that again, one more time. Depending on how upset children are, I might do this 2, 3, 4 times before moving on. And then we want to make sure that as a teacher, we intervene as fair-mindedly as possible. Not that we are telling the children what the solution is, but we are working with them for them to come up with their best solution. It is really important as a teacher to come in judgment-free, which means our preconceived notions need to go out the window. So even if we are dealing with a child who is often involved in conflict, we want to make sure not to assume that that child instigated a conflict or is somehow the perpetrator. We also want to make sure that we are focusing on solutions as opposed to focusing on the problem itself. And then as the teacher, depending on the level that the children have of navigating this, we might suggest alternatives for the future. We might say, next time, Johnny would like it if you asked instead of taking it from him. Or next time, instead of pushing your friend when you're upset, maybe you could say, I don't like that. So ideas for how to do it differently in the future. The third one is that as mediator, the teacher shares the power. The teacher does not impose the power or does not impose through their position of power, but they share it. So as a mediator, you need to be an outside party that assists 2 or more individuals to resolve their own conflict. You also need to stay firm regarding the mediation process. So it's not about firm about imposing a particular solution, but it's more being firm that the expectation is all the parties engage in this process and they come to a resolution that works for all of them. Sometimes you might hear a child say something distracting to move everyone's attention away or start talking about something else. And that's where you need to be firm of, we're talking about what just happened right now, not what happened last week or not about what's happening later. So keeping the guidelines of we are talking about this particular thing right now. The fourth point is that the teacher supports the right of personal expression and the skill of effective communication. So this is where you ensure that all children have an opportunity to express themselves and use the most effective tools that they have at their disposal for their age. So part of this is perspective taking. It helps children learn how to take the perspective of another. It can be quite some time for children to develop this. They can be 5, 6, 7 before they really start to understand that other people have a different perspective than them. So hearing someone else's story, even if it doesn't jive with theirs, helps them be able to take perspective. As the teacher, you are there to ensure that that process continues and that the children stay focused on the particular issue at hand and do not meander verbally or mentally off into something else. And then you really must reinforce and ensure that all of the children feel like they are worthy members of the classroom and that their voice can be heard regardless of their role in that conflict. It's extraordinarily important. Children who do not have this piece will often become perpetrators far more. But if they, conversely, if they feel like their voice can be heard, we will see those behaviors that we don't want dissipate. Number 5 is that the teacher is not there to impose the solutions. The teacher may suggest, depending on the ability of the children, you might want to suggest solutions because they may not be familiar with them themselves, but it's up to the children to agree on the appropriate solution. Children can be guided to come up with variations on a solution if they're at an impasse. So you might try turn taking as an example, and if turn taking isn't something that the children are really feeling that great about, one child or both children, maybe you can offer a variation on turn taking, which is, instead of child A takes a turn, then child B, maybe it's child A takes a turn, child B takes a turn, and then A gets a turn again, something like that. Adult logic does not matter here. As long as the children agree, just go with it. This happens frequently, that the way the children will create restitution around the issue is very different than what we as adults think would be applicable. It's totally okay. As long as it works for the children, it doesn't matter if it's logical to us adults or not. And then if the children begin to soften and work out the issue on their own, if it's not a big deal, let's not make it a bigger deal. Teacher can kind of step back and just let them have their way of doing it. So sometimes children might just begin playing with something cooperatively that they had been fighting over. That's a point where you can just say, it looks like you two have found a way to work together on this. I'm going to let you take over and I'm going to go do something else. Letting them know that they don't have to state the solution, agree on all the steps on how they're going to do it, and then get to play. Sometimes they'll just move into play, which is their expression of their acceptance for the solution. And number 6 is that the teacher does not need to be perfect at conflict management skills for this to work. So my boss at my Head Start job often says perfection is the enemy of the good. And I think that really applies here, that good enough is good enough. The teachers don't have to have this down perfectly for children to learn a lot from this process. What is important is that the positivity and genuine support by the teacher is really present. If a teacher does not genuinely support one of the members, that's more detrimental than doing the steps perfectly. And then the biggest indicator that it worked is if the children move on like nothing ever happened. Children rarely hold grudges in a classroom that really employs the guidance philosophy. So if your children are just kind of moving on and it's a blip and it works out quickly, that's the best indicator that it's working. So you probably, I'm assuming, saw this section of your textbook. I wanted to reiterate it because I feel like it's a really important piece of guidance in the classroom. And then I'm sure that you also saw this handy dandy 5-finger formula. This is always a big hit of students in this class, and I love it myself. So we're going to go over it really briefly here, and I encourage you to use your hand as we go and run through the steps, because one way that we really learn is by physically practicing things. So you can't see me, but I'm going to run through my fingers as we do this as well. So the thumb is to cool down, right? That's you and the children. Deep breaths, cool down. Make sure you take deep belly breaths. That's really important. And the children as well. 2, discuss all point of views of the children. 3, brainstorm solutions. You can give ideas, children give ideas. Come up with a couple, 3, 4 options before landing on something. 4, agree on a solution and give the children the space to try it out. They might think they want to do a particular solution. It doesn't really work out great for them. Cool, you can come back and say, well, we tried this, that didn't really work. Maybe we can try one of these other ideas that we brainstormed on step 3. You don't have to always go all the way back to step 1. Sometimes you can just back up a step if something doesn't work well, provided that the children are not too upset. And then 5 is monitor and reinforce. It's not that you have to be the bouncer. You don't have to be in the middle of the ring or the referee. You just need to keep an eye out, and if it works, reinforce what works. Gosh, you decided to turn take. That worked out really great. I noticed that worked for you. Maybe you can use that solution again. So there's our 5-finger formula to help us remember the points that we talked about before around conflict mediation. I hope you give this a try in your teaching practice, as will find that it's really handy.